Michael Jordan was in his second prime. The Seinfeld finale aired to more than 70 million viewers. Bill Clinton declared that he did not sleep with Monica Lewinsky. And an unknown rapper known as Eminem just got signed by Dr. Dre. 1998 was a turbulent year, but the most important thing for a 10-year-old Jared Fearing was to see the brand new American TriStar-made Godzilla. Ah, 1998, when I was just a little 10-year-old. It was a great time to be alive, honestly. We didn't know how good we had it in the 90s, and looking back, maybe it was even the best decade. And the 80s gets a lot of love for its pop culture, but I think the 90s was probably the best balance between good content and good living in just the general world sense. I digress. The marketing for this movie was absolutely gigantic. There were fast food tie-ins, magazines, posters you could get. They were advertising it on buses and on buildings all over the place. And something that I remember most is actually a teaser trailer back when trailers were like little movies in and of themselves, where a bunch of kids go to a museum and their teacher is talking to them about Tyrannosaurus Rex and how it was the biggest predator of all time, and a foot crashes through the building and smashes the T-Rex skeleton. It was super cool, and when I saw that, I don't remember what movie I was at, but at that point in time, I did not know that there was an American Godzilla. And imagine being a kid whose favorite thing was Godzilla, and you're at the theater and you're like, what movie could this be? And they announce that it's a Godzilla movie. I remember losing my mind. The hype for this movie was unreal, and perhaps that's part of the reason why a lot of people don't like it, because there was such a big media campaign to get people hyped for it. And I'm not exactly sure what people were expecting, if I'm being completely honest, but we'll talk about that in a second. The most famous of these crossover campaigns was the Taco Bell crossover.
I think I need a bigger box.
At the time, the Taco Bell mascot was a little chihuahua that always wanted Taco Bell, good dog, and he was trying to catch Godzilla, and the catchphrase, "I think I'm gonna need a bigger box," became very iconic in the 90s. Adorable. Great crossover. Everyone loves Taco Bell. Come on. A large part of the marketing surrounding this movie was, what is the new Godzilla going to look like? And in the Taco Bell campaign, people had to find these little like viewfinder pieces to see if they could uncover it on this other hologram. You'd put them over one another and hopefully find Godzilla, and you'd win some prizes or something. At that point, we had a Taco Bell in my city, and I remember going constantly to do the different Godzilla things. There were different Godzilla toys you could get. There were different Godzilla cups, and I remember making my mom take me a bajillion times to do these things. I had the magazines, I bought lots of the toys, and the crazy thing is at Toys R Us, for example, they had these big setup stations that were all Godzilla toys, but they weren't showing what Godzilla looked like yet. Until they got closer to the movie, it was just totally ambiguous. And if I remember correctly, I think they actually revealed the Godzilla kids first, before they actually showcased the full-sized adult Godzilla. Because I remember I owned a few of those Godzilla, the children of Godzilla. I don't know exactly what the best way to describe them is, because they're not all son of Godzillas, so Godzilla kids. The design of the new Godzilla was actually such a big secret that TriStar sent out fake designs to various companies to see who could be trusted. and they were looking to see which ones leaked. And believe it or not, they sent out a fake design to Fruit of the Loom, which wound up on the internet, meaning that somebody at Fruit of the Loom had leaked the design. And because of that, they pulled the license from Fruit of the Loom, and they did not get to do any Godzilla merchandise for this film. So they were taking it pretty seriously. Now, as already said, I saw this movie when I was 10 years old, and it's a very fond childhood memory for me. But I'm going to try to look at this as objectively as possible while we talk about it here. But I know that there's a lot of hate surrounding this movie, and stick with me because I feel like it's not justified hate. The movie is a complete American remake, and they've wanted to transform it into an American action story rather than an allegorical monster movie about nuclear consequences like the Japanese original. They don't go for any kind of a message, it's straight up an action movie, and I'm completely fine with that. I would rather them not try to piggyback on that when it's already been done so perfectly in the past. The movie opens with a montage of marine reptiles, they're marine iguanas, and we see various intercut footage of atomic testing, and we hear people, the radio is counting down in French to the atomic blast. The score is fantastic. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone mention actually the musical score of this movie, but I love it. I think they have some great pieces of music for this, and it works incredibly well, especially with the opening. It's booming, it's ominous, it really sets the stage, and then it cuts immediately to a Japanese freighter. And the opening Japanese freighter attack is incredible. It's such a good opening, and you know what? They've done the attack at sea thing a few different times throughout the franchise, as I mentioned in the Godzilla 1984 video, but I actually don't think they do it any better than here. They have great special effects of things falling as the ship is tilting and turning, and we don't know what Godzilla looks like yet, and there's a scene where his claws burst through the hull and take out a bunch of people and water comes rushing in. It's a fantastic action sequence. I can't imagine starting the movie off that strongly and someone already being sour about it. But this movie has so much hate spiraling around it. It's crazy the things people will complain about when that is an excellently done, from both a action perspective as well as a technical perspective, sequence. I love it. It's a great opening. The movie then hard cuts to Matthew Broderick, who's working in Chernobyl, and he's driving with headphones on, which I'm pretty sure is illegal, at least in Canada. I think it's illegal. But he gets out and he's digging around for worms, and we see him put some electrical current into the ground, and it drives the earthworms to the surface. And then he's intercepted by US agents who want him to be part of their radiation team that they are setting up to investigate what Godzilla might be. There's an ongoing joke in this movie where they just keep calling him the worm guy, and I don't really love that because it's like he's doing very legitimate science. He explains in one point that the worms are, I can't remember what he says percentage-wise, but he says like 20% bigger due to the fallout in Chernobyl, and everyone's like, oh, worm guy. It's like, that is like a very good scientific project for him to be working on. I don't know why people are scoffing at that or making fun of it. That's a little bit odd to me. Anyway, it cuts ahead, and Matthew Broderick is now with the military, and he's being given the rundown by one of the army, I don't remember what his rank was, generals? I don't think he's a general, captain, doesn't matter. Anyway, he's telling Matthew Broderick what the scoop is, and it turns out he's standing in a giant footprint. That scene is very cool as it pans back and we see that there's Godzilla footprints everywhere. I think that's a great idea. The execution is a little weird. Like, it looks like they used a bobcat to dig out the footprints, which they probably did. I would like it to look a little bit more like actually pressed in as opposed to just like cut straight down. But that's just me like picking on minor details. I really like that scene overall. I think it's very cool that the first time he's kind of introduced to the idea, it's that he's standing in a footprint so big he doesn't even realize it's a footprint. As we pan back and we see the footprints go down the stretch of road, that's a good moment where I think this movie has some beautiful cinematography. There's some excellent shots in it, and the set design is really, really good, actually. If this movie happened today, I would not be shocked at all to see it have like Oscar consideration for set design, but that's less of a commentary about this movie in the 90s than it is about movies now usually being filmed on volume walls or green screens, where set design is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and more digital. We get introduced to the female lead, Matthew Broderick's love interest, and she's an intern at a news office. Harry Shearer is the lead anchor for this news station. And Harry Shearer, if you don't know, does a bajillion voices on The Simpsons, but most famously is Mr. Burns. In this movie, he does a great job as just an actor. He's acted in quite a few roles, but he's predominantly on The Simpsons. He's also very famous for This Is Spinal Tap. In this movie, he plays just like a dirtbag male boss that is kind of sexually harassing his interns and using his interest in her to withhold her career advancement. And I can see how this storyline might be off-putting for some people, but especially now in today's age, it's like that is a very realistic storyline, especially for that time in the 90s. So, I don't know, it is what it is. It's very believable. Even though Harry Shearer is being a misogynistic douchebag, he is still very likable because he's Harry Shearer and he delivers a lot of charm with the character. And the score kind of backs that up with some like bouncy comedic beats, but really he is being just like a disgusting Harvey Weinstein type character. It's also just kind of weird to see that the 90s casual harassment is just totally normal too. Her one coworker is just like, oh, he's a scumbag. Too bad, though. Maria Pitillo, who plays Audrey Timmons, does a really good job, or as good of job as she can, I guess, with the role. But her character is pretty unlikable. She does like a lot of bad things, and it's kind of the like, well, I was hurt by X, so I'm going to hurt Y to justify it. And I don't love that aspect of it at all. Matthew Broderick visits the destroyed tanker that is now washed up on shore. And again, the set design is incredible. I don't know if they did a combination of minis and live action, or if they actually did some alterations to a tanker, but that's how good it is that I don't know. It looks like a big beached destroyed tanker. It's great set design and special effects. And this is where we're introduced to Jean Reno, who is kind of undercover at this point in the movie as an insurance salesman, but really he's with the French Secret Service. And Jean Reno is excellent in pretty much everything he's in, and this is no different. Jean Reno kills it in this movie. The weird Simpsons connection in this movie, I think, is just kind of by chance, but we've got Hank Azaria as a main character. Hank Azaria voices many characters on The Simpsons. Specifically, he was known for Apu and Moe and Police Chief Wiggum, and Harry Shearer, he's most famous for playing Mr. Burns. And there's even a very brief cameo by Nancy Cartwright, who's the longtime voiceover of Bart Simpson. So I don't really know how these three just kind of happen to fall into the Godzilla movie. If there's like a more official Simpsons connection, I don't know about, but they're in it. And this is the most Simpsons actors in a project that's not The Simpsons ever, which is bizarre. We find some other fishing trawlers out in the middle of the ocean, and there's 3 of them linked together by a large fishing net, and I know nothing about ocean fishing, so that's probably normal, I guess. But they start getting drug under the ocean, and we see the ships turning vertical and pulled down. And I gotta say, the ocean attack scenes on the opening tanker and then these fishing trawlers, seeing them get taken out in this way, I think it's the best ocean attack scenes in the entire franchise. I really do. The effects are done so well, they look so good, they completely look like ships being drug underwater. And they do it with the score is beautiful, the effects look beautiful. I can't say enough good things about these ocean attack scenes. They really killed it. The military is scratching its head over all these things that are happening, and their lead scientist on the team, a redhead who's not Matthew Broderick, immediately jumps to Dinosaur, which is kind of hilarious. I mean, imagine being in like the war room and they're like, what's going on? We're losing ships. And the first thing somebody jumps to is just like, yeah, it's an undiscovered dinosaur. I personally would love it. I feel like the military superiors would not love it. And then Matthew Broderick, who's much more level-headed, says maybe this is some kind of a thing related to all the radiation in the area, and it could be some kind of a mutation, maybe the first of a new species. It's a lot better of a take than just straight up jumping into Dinosaur. The very first emergence scene of Godzilla in this movie, he's still kind of obscured. We don't get a clean look at him yet. And there's a homeless gentleman that is fishing on the docks, and a giant tidal wave is kind of pushing towards him, and he runs away as the pier is exploding, and we see it get bigger and bigger, and Godzilla steps out and there's boats dropping off of him and stuff. It's awesome. It's such a good sequence because they're still trying to have some mystery around how he looks at this point, and we get a brief glimpse of his face as he like bites into a trailer, and there's people unloading the trailer from the inside as the teeth crush in and the trailer itself gets crumpled. Now, I've already told you some of the things I don't like, and here's another one. The mayor, who is acted very well, is just like an odd character, though. It seems to be a hit piece on Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. The mayor is Mayor Ebert, and his whole campaign thing is thumbs up, and his assistant is known as Gene, and in real life it was Siskel and Ebert, and it was Gene Siskel. I don't know, like, it's bizarre to see the level of pettiness that a filmmaker has to have to like make characters based on real life reviewers and just like trash them and make them like villains in this movie. What an odd choice, and I'm actually kind of shocked that a studio didn't step in and be like, don't trash Roger Ebert, he's the biggest film critic on the planet. And if you're one of my younger viewers, I'll just make this super quick. As you know, in the 90s, we didn't have cell phones where you can just look things up in an instant. In fact, most people didn't even have home computers until the 2000s. So most of the opinions you would get on movies would be in your local newspaper, or on TV, there was Siskel and Ebert. Siskel and Ebert were the two first mainstream film critics. Their show would give you a brief preview of what they were watching, they would talk about the thing exactly as I'm doing right now, and then they would give it a rating, whether it would be thumbs up or thumbs down. And so that's where the phrase two thumbs up comes from, because there were two critics and they both had to give it a thumbs up, or sometimes you'd get splits and, you know, whatever. But they were very popular and I used to watch them all the time. And unfortunately, Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel have both passed away now, and so the time of the TV review show has kind of passed. During Godzilla's first kind of emergence sequence when he's running through New York initially, Hank Azaria grabs his camera, which is also cool to see that's the importance of footage at that time, because we didn't have cell phone cameras. You had to take a physical shoulder cam with a physical VHS in it and chase after Godzilla. And I really like that sequence. You get to see the destruction happening all around, people reacting appropriately, and then Hank Azaria nearly gets stepped on and has the whole thing filmed via like POV off of his shoulder cam, and we get our first glimpse of Godzilla through this kind of blurry footage. It's a really good, almost like found footage take on this one sequence of the film, and I really like it. We see Jean Reno in his French Secret Service van with all his French Secret Service buddies, and there's an ongoing joke about him trying different American coffees and being like, it is not French. And I just alienated my entire French community by doing that brief little voice there. But that's okay, because what I'm going to say next is going to alienate them even more. But that's exactly how French people are, being like, American coffee. So I think it's funny. I think it's like a harmless joke. But if any French people are mad about it, just know that it's because that's exactly how you are. So I like that joke. I've had a lot of interaction with different French people, and that is totally accurate. So, and it's all in good fun anyway, so who cares? The military starts thinking about ways that they can try to trap Godzilla or attract him out so they can kill him, and they try to lure him out with a big pile of fish. Good idea. This is where we get our first glimpse of what Godzilla actually looks like, and he comes out, and it's a really good reveal. I watched this movie in preparation for this video. I watched it on 4K Ultra HD, and I gotta say, the CGI, I remember kind of bothering me at the time a little bit. Not that it was bad, but we were going from the Heisei and the Showa era Godzilla that everybody knew and loved to a largely CGI representation, and I remember that being kind of jarring. But now, in 2024, going back and watching it in 4K, the CGI has actually aged incredibly well, especially given a lot of the criticisms of movies these days, is that CGI seems to be getting worse and worse on the large scale. Whereas then, because it was a newer technology, I think you had to do it pretty well to get it into a mainstream movie. And I think that you see here that they did some CGI that actually does sort of stand up to the test of time. I'm very impressed with it in 2024. Godzilla steals some fish, realizes he's being attacked, and takes off through New York. He's chased by 3 Apache helicopters, and I love the helicopter chase sequence. I think it's so good. He comes out behind the helicopters and destroys them and chases them, ends up underneath them, jumps up. Like it's a very, very good sequence. And again, the action sequences in this movie are really well done. Like it blows my mind when people try to pick apart this movie because they've actually used so much care to make these good monster sequences. At this point, Matthew Broderick finds some blood from the battle, and he goes to test it with home pregnancy kits. Now, maybe this is where people start kind of developing hate for the movie, the idea of like Godzilla being pregnant or whatever. But in real life, this is kind of how lizards reproduce. They can become both genders in order to lay eggs. By the way, later in the movie, they do refer to Godzilla as a he. So canonically, Godzilla's a he. But, you know, as a reptile, even the men can lay eggs. It kind of goes both ways. So it's an odd thing to be really upset about, in my opinion. But anyway, I think that's where people kind of get lost with this movie. While buying a bunch of pregnancy kits, Matthew Broderick runs into his old love interest, Audrey Timmons, and they go back to his military bunker slash tent, where he kind of fills her in on some top secret details, and she totally steals that information and uses it to further her own career, which she doesn't even really have yet, and in the process completely sewers Matthew Broderick. And so, yeah, her character does like a lot of like really horrible stuff, and that sucks. Audrey also steals a confidential videotape from Matthew Broderick. That's so crazy. But anyways, she steals a piece of military evidence which features a Japanese survivor of the fishing tanker being interviewed, where he says that it's a mythical sea dragon known as Godzilla. And it's, I don't know, kind of in line with the background that we've got in the other movies, that, you know, ancients living on Oda Island would believe in this dragon that they had this relationship with. And we see that in Gojira, and we see that in -1 and other iterations. So I don't know why that would be like an upsetting plot point for people to see it here. Of course, she steals this tape and then does a news story on it, but she's not really an anchor, so instead of running that, Harry Shearer does his own version of the story, and they air that one because he's actually an anchor. Anyway, Harry Shearer pronounces it Godzilla, and she's like, no, it's Gojira, you idiot. But I think that's like a fine little smirk at the fact that Godzilla is the Americanized name. Harry Shearer, or Cayman, stealing the news article that Audrey had kind of put together featuring the stolen footage, him stealing that is totally believable as being like a 90s misogynistic villain, especially given everything else that we've seen in the movie up to this point. So I don't know, his character is totally on point, I think. Harry Shearer's character, Charles Cayman, also his last name Cayman. Cayman is a different breed of alligator. So I have a hard time thinking that that's a coincidence. I'm sure that has to be an intentional reference, considering it's a movie about reptiles. But yeah, there you go. Charles Cayman, that's a type of alligator. After this news report airs, they immediately fire Matthew Broderick, which I guess is kind of believable, but not really, in my opinion, in the sense that he's been like their expert on the thing. All the major plot points have come from things that he's deduced. In real life, if you're that valuable to an operation, I don't think they would cut you loose for sharing what ends up getting shared. It's not like he released a thing being like, oh, the US created Godzilla and also were responsible for all these deaths. It was like, oh no, there was like a little bit of footage that got stolen that kind of implicated like previous knowledge. I don't think it was that bad. So him getting fired is a little bit ridiculous, but it's just a plot device to get him into a cab with Jean Reno, and then he gets kidnapped by the French Secret Service. Moments after Nick gets fired, he's confronted by Audrey, who's like, oh, are you mad at me? Is it because of the videotape? It's like, you stole military property and reported on things that he did not give you explicit permission to talk about that were clearly like undercover details, and he hadn't seen her for all these years prior. And anyway, I'm glad whoever was writing the script for this, they handled it appropriately, with Matthew Broderick being like, yeah, I'm fucking pissed at you. Like, what the hell? You stole a bunch of shit from me. So I honestly don't like the way that their romance kind of goes throughout the movie, because if somebody had done that to me at that point, it's like, yes, of course, I'm never trusting you again. Like, what do you think? Anyways, Matthew Broderick gets away from his toxic ex and gets to hang out with the real boys, the French Secret Service. It turns out that they are going to search for the Godzilla nest, and they want Matthew Broderick along for the ride. There's a funny scene with them all chewing gum and Matthew Broderick being like, oh yes, you look more American, and I like that scene. It's really like kind of a dumb humor moment, but I like it, it's funny. Jean Reno is also showing Matthew Broderick around, and there's tons of automatic weapons everywhere, and Matthew Broderick's like, how did you sneak this all into the country? And Jean Reno's like, this is America, we can buy anything. That's a funny scene because it's 100% true. They all delve into the destroyed subway, and again, the sets look great. They did such a good job with set design. These are like physical sets that they've constructed where they're crawling through like angled subway cars and things of that. Like it's so good to see this set design now, knowing that most things that we're getting in 2024 and beyond are digitally created on a green screen, or what's called a volume wall, which is basically like a big circular green screen, to make it a simple explanation. While they're traversing the destroyed subway, Hank Azaria's character Animal and Audrey Timmons come down into the subway as well, following them, thinking that they're onto a big scoop and that they're going to find this nest. We get to see a brief scene of Godzilla actually burrowing through the destroyed wreckage of the New York Underground subway. It looks a little bit kind of wonky, but I like that it's really, they've dug out their own set of abilities for the American Godzilla. He's not as powerful as the Japanese one, but he can dig, he can burrow, he's fast, he can run, he can jump. They've given a lot of these different physical aspects to it, I think in a way so that they're not trying to one-up the Japanese version. They wanted to do something different. Japanese Godzilla is like a tank. This Godzilla is like a motorcycle, super fast and versatile and can move around. And also motorcycles can burrow underground, right? In Son of Godzilla, there's not a clear definition of where the egg comes from. In the Heisei series, there's not a clear answer where the egg comes from. And they always kind of play patty cake back and forth with where, like, it's like, where are these Godzilla children coming from? Did Godzilla lay the eggs? He's definitely raising the kids, but they never gave a concrete answer. This is the first movie that is like Godzilla laid a clutch of eggs and everybody hated it. Everybody gets together and they find that Madison Square Garden has been destroyed and dug out and turned into a nest of Godzilla eggs. There's eggs everywhere, and there's like big, practically made actual eggs, and there's actual baby Godzillas that have been made with prosthetics and animatronics and their suits. They look so good. The egg hatching scene is actually one of my favorite scenes in this whole movie. They do so many baby Godzillas, and they do the effect of them hatching is done so well, coming out, eating fish, smelling the humans and realizing the humans smell like fish. It's just a great scene that goes from being like, oh, this is a pretty big problem with Godzilla, to being like, oh, this is like a pretty big problem with Godzilla. Everybody is running for their lives as the baby Godzillas chase everyone, trying to eat them. And a lot of people do get eaten, and I like that too. It's like raising the stakes. These are little Godzillas that are trying to kill and eat their prey. Animal and Audrey run into one of the locker rooms, and Animal is like shocked and gasps. And she's like, oh no, what's wrong? And he's like, oh, this is where the Knicks get showered. That's a really funny scene. I actually really like that line.
Whoa! This is where the Knicks, like, get showered and everything.
God.
Meanwhile, Big Boy Godzilla has been tracked down and chased into the bay, where they were able to hit it with some torpedoes. And it looks like they've killed the adult Godzilla. Madison Square Garden completely overrun with baby Godzillas. Matthew Broderick, Jean Reno, Hank Azaria, and Maria Pitillo all get together. They're the last survivors, and they're able to get a broadcast out that shows that these baby Godzillas are everywhere, and soon they're going to be big, and the building needs to be taken out immediately by an airstrike. And so they call it in. The military is sending jets to come finish off the baby Godzillas, and it's a race against the clock to get out. And I really like everything to do with this sequence is really fun. It's a great action sequence, done expertly well. And they get out just as the bombs drop. Madison Square Garden is completely destroyed, and it looks like the end of the movie. They actually do a false ending where everybody is standing, kind of recovering from the situation. And a lot of the times when movies are ending, they do like a sky pan where it slowly pulls away from them, and that's a very good transition technique to get to an ending. But as they do their kind of false ending, we hear the familiar roar of the big Godzilla, who then pops out and is super pissed to see all of its babies dead. Now, they actually do a scene, I don't know if this was a direct reference to it, but maybe it is. In the final Heisei era film, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, there's a scene where Godzilla leans in to see the dying Godzilla Jr. and gets his face right up close and is very sad to see his offspring dying. They redo that scene almost identical in Godzilla 98, with Godzilla coming down and seeing one of its deceased children and being very upset. It's hard for me to imagine that that's not a direct reference, but Godzilla then chases our human protagonist in a taxi cab, and it's a great action sequence. We see things blowing up, Godzilla wrecking shit, going through tunnels. This is one of the only times in the movie we get to see Godzilla actually use fire breath. And that is a bit of a critique on the character that I would have liked differently. If you were going to do no fire breath at all, so be it. They easily could have had Godzilla use its fire breath to take out, you know, a helicopter or some civilians or whatever. But because they decided to make sure that this Godzilla did have atomic breath, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that. They lure Godzilla to a suspension bridge where he's caught in the wires, and they're able to finally actually kill Godzilla through the use of jets that come by and launch some missiles directly into him. Godzilla is dead. Matthew Broderick walks up to the beast as it's dying, and we can hear its heartbeat against the sound of the rain. And it's a great scene. I love that scene. They did a really smart thing, in my opinion, with the audio by having the sound of the rain being kind of eminent over top of any type of a score. We've got the rain, we've got the heartbeat, and we see Matthew Broderick and Godzilla face to face as Godzilla passes away. I really like that scene. We get the conclusion for all our human characters. Jean Reno is happy that the French Secret Service was able to kind of eliminate the problem that they feel that they created. Matthew Broderick has helped defeat Godzilla using his brain, or whatever you want to attribute to him, I guess. Finding the nest. Audrey Timmons looks like she's got some kind of an exclusive story, and Hank Azaria is basically the same as when the movie starts. It seems like he was already pretty successful at the start of this movie, and he's definitely successful at the end. So he doesn't really have a character arc, but I like Hank Azaria for everything he does in this movie. Godzilla 1998 didn't make the amount of money that they were thinking it was going to make at the box office, but it was still a huge success. This movie actually made more money as a foreign-made American reboot than anything in history up until Godzilla in 2014, made by Gareth Edwards. So it still made lots of money, and it was still successful. The movie had a budget of around $130 million, and it made over $400 million worldwide. But it underperformed in Japan, where they were actually hoping for it to do much better, and it kind of underperformed domestically. So even though it was a financial success, the studio still kind of deemed that it was not a success, which is a little bit bizarre, especially given today's numbers with movies in theaters. One of the very best things to come out of Godzilla 98 was Godzilla the series. Godzilla the series was a cartoon made by Adelaide Productions, and if you're my age, in your mid-30s, you'll probably remember they also made the absolute banger Extreme Ghostbusters, Men in Black cartoon, Jackie Chan Adventures, Big Guy and Rusty, even more. They're a great production company, and they handled the Godzilla animated series. This series, which you can and absolutely should get on DVD, has 40 episodes, and they fix a lot of the issues that people had with the movie. Godzilla is, well, let's put it this way. The series is a direct sequel to the movie too. Nothing is necessarily retconned for the show, but the movie ends with one single egg surviving the bombing at Madison Square Garden, and it's hatching. That's how the movie ends. It's a cool little cliffhanger, and we never really see anything of it again until the animated series. In the animated series, the hatching egg has imprinted onto the smell of Matthew Broderick. And so now this rapidly growing Godzilla that is hatched thinks Matthew Broderick is its buddy, and they're gonna work together to fight other monsters. That's right, the animated series has a ton of other monsters in it, and the animated Godzilla breathes the atomic breath. It's a great series. It's honestly so good. There's a storyline where the Godzilla that's killed in the suspension bridge in the movie gets brought back with mechanical parts and essentially becomes the Mechagodzilla of the animated universe. It's so good. I cannot say enough good things about Godzilla the series, and you can get it right now. A lot of people have not seen this series, and it's so good. If there's one suggestion that you take from this video, it would be to put some time aside to actually watch Godzilla the animated series, because it's a real gem that gets really overlooked by people. I think a lot of people don't even know that it exists. I know that it exists because I was alive when it was on TV and I was watching it. But a lot of people probably don't even know about it, and it's so good. And just a side note about the production company, all their other projects are great too. If you've never seen Extreme Ghostbusters, mwah. The Men in Black animated series, mwah, so good. If you can ever get your hands on any of those, they will blow your mind if you've never seen them. Godzilla 98 is a special movie for me because it was the first Godzilla movie I ever actually saw in the theater. I got taken multiple times by my mom, my dad, even my uncle. I saw it a bunch, and I loved it then, and I love it now. So maybe I'm a little bit biased when it comes to Godzilla 1998, but I feel like a lot of the critiques people have on it actually don't hold a lot of weight. If your problem with this movie is that you don't like the human story, guess what? That's most of the Godzilla movies. Most of the Godzilla movies are getting through the human story so that you can get to the Godzilla aspect of it. I very rarely think of any of the Godzilla movies where I'm like, yes, I love that one human part in it, and that's why I'm going to watch this movie. And I'm not saying that every human role is bad, because they're not, but it's definitely the drawing aspect is always Godzilla. And in this movie, even though Godzilla isn't a tank and he's not fighting other monsters, the action sequences involving Godzilla are incredible. The ocean sequences of seeing the fishing trawlers pulled under, the tanker attacked, the chase through the city with the helicopters, these are all top-notch action scenes, and I really don't understand the hate that this movie gets. I know a lot of people are starting to come around to it in 2024, saying that, like, it's a good monster movie, it's just not a good Godzilla movie. But I don't even buy that. It is a good Godzilla movie, it's a different interpretation of the character. And we've seen different interpretations throughout the year, and we probably will continue to see different interpretations for many years to come. And that's okay. That's why it's such a flexible, lovable character, because we can have these different takes on it. The design is really interesting. It kind of hits the sweet spot between being like an upright standing guy in a suit and like the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. It's kind of the meshing of those two things, and I think they do a really good job with the design. I don't love how it looks in every single scene, but as a general design, I do really like it. And it's something that I feel passionate about defending, because I think, much like the Destroya movie, there's been this idea that's gotten into the zeitgeist through word of mouth or the internet or whatever, and people that have never even seen the movie just run with it. I think that Godzilla 98 is a very good standalone Godzilla movie, and there's a lot of things that I enjoy about it. I highly recommend it. I know that a lot of people don't like it, and that's okay if you legitimately don't like it. I respect your opinion. It's wrong, but I respect it. But if you've never seen Godzilla 1998 and you've been avoiding it because you've heard bad things, or, you know, people don't like it in general, I say watch it. I recommend it. And I actually think the movie has aged incredibly well, especially when we see the mix of CGI and practical effects, compared to what we get nowadays, which is almost entirely CGI in every production. I'm not just talking about Godzilla movies, because like I've said before, we've been blessed that the modern legendary Godzillas and Godzilla -1, absolutely blessed with the level of CGI that we've got, because those movies actually are very good. But in movie making as a whole, CGI has become more problematic, let's put it that way. So the CGI in Godzilla 98 has aged well, the practical effects have aged incredibly well, and I think there's a lot to enjoy about this movie, and I would invite you all to give it a rewatch or watch it for the first time. I love Godzilla 98, and I'm gonna stand by that. This movie was the only one in the TriStar era, unfortunately. Like I said, even though it was a financial success, they kind of considered it a flop, and because of that, the rights went back to Toho in Japan, and they were like, you know what, we're just starting again, and we're gonna start with Godzilla 2000, which actually came out in 1999 in Japan, which is a little bit funny. But this is the start of a new era. And as I've mentioned in a previous video, the Heisei era is technically continuing at this point in time, but because they had already ended the Heisei era with Godzilla vs. Destroya, these new movies from 2000 on are called the Millennium Era. The Millennium Era only lasted from 1999 to 2004, but in that time they pumped out 6 movies. And the Millennium Era is, in my opinion, the biggest mixed bag in the franchise. There's definitely some good, and there's definitely some bad. So come back next time while we embark into the Millennium Era with Godzilla 2000.